So welcome to those of you who have joined us on our call. I'm Louise Jackson. I'm the director of the Alumni Career Program here at UC Riverside's Alumni Association. And we have Andrew Kumar today with us. Andrew is an alumnus of UC Riverside. He's a graduate of the class of 2011. We're really grateful to have Andrew with us. Andrew has recruiting and human resources background in the tech industry. He's worked for Google and Facebook. Currently, he serves as a career coach and an instructor at General Assembly. And Andrew has volunteered as kindly offered to be with us today to speak to us about developing yourself as a candidate in the job search. So thank you, Andrew, for giving us your time, your expertise. Really excited about today's session. If you have a question as we're progressing through today's session, make sure you ask it that. That's the Q&A panel that's at the bottom of your screen. Please make sure you ask those questions. We really want to make this a conversation between Andrew, myself, and the alumni on the call, so that this is beneficial to you as you progress in your job search or in your career development. And so without much further ado, I'm going to segue to Andrew, and we're going to be talking today about developing yourself as a candidate in the job search. Thank you so much, Andrew. We're excited to have you, and you can take it away.
Thanks, Louise. Hey, everybody. It is great to just join you guys this afternoon. I hope you guys will have as much fun with this material as I do. And don't hesitate to ask questions. Louise, feel free to stop me since I can only see my presentation
Absolutely.
with Zoom. So feel free to stop me so we can talk through this stuff. But yeah, don't hesitate if you have any questions. But let's jump into this. I'm going to talk to you today about developing yourself as a candidate. Part of my role here at General Assembly is being a career coach for our students, which means advising them on how to be competitive candidates in the job market. What we do here at General Assembly is we have what are called immersive programs or boot camps, where we take students who are absolute beginners and in 3 months teach them how to be web developers or UX designers or data scientists. I work on the technical side, particularly with our web development students and our data scientists. And part of my job is giving weekly lectures on basically how to be competitive in the market. So I want to talk to you guys today about just how to develop yourself as a candidate. The hardest thing about the job search is that there is a lot of information out there, which doesn't sound like a problem, because most of the time the problem that we have is we don't have enough information. But when it comes to the job search, there's almost too much information. It's a bit of overload. Let me know if this resonates with you all out there. A lot of times we'll see on LinkedIn or TechCrunch or Business Insider or Forbes or Harvard Business Review, we'll see an article that says, this Facebook executive says this is the one thing that you should do as a job seeker. And we read that article and we go, all right, cool, I've got to do that one thing and everything's going to work out great. And then the next week we'll read an article and it'll say, Twitter CEO says this is the one thing that you shouldn't do as a job seeker. And it is the exact same thing that the Facebook executive said that you should do. So the job search can be really confusing. It can be really noisy. And the other thing is there are a lot of voices. There are a lot of probably voices in your life, because most people in our circles have gone on job searches before. And so my job today is to cut through a lot of that noise. I will warn you in advance, I have a very, very simple approach. So I'm sorry if I don't blow your minds today. But hopefully I do with the simplicity of what I'm showing you guys today. So let's jump in.
Absolutely, Andrew, and to really resonate with me in terms of the alumni that we see coming to reach out to us for services, exactly what you're saying. What I have noticed is alumni will jump online, they'll spend hours and hours on Indeed. There's so much information, there's so many potential opportunities and so much possibility, but very little strategic or quality versus quantity in terms of the job search. So what you're saying exactly, that there's so much information, whether it's actual job, possibilities or job openings, as well as advice. And so what I have found is sort of that cognitive dissonance of someone just being overwhelmed by choice, being overwhelmed by possibility as well as information, and having a very hard time focusing on what the key elements are in the job search. So you really are spot on there in terms of at least what I have seen in working with our alumni in their job searches. So exactly, if we can cut through all those voices and that noise to give our alumni that very, very strategic, quality advice that's going to help them.
Absolutely. Which brings us to our learning objectives for today. We're going to answer the questions: how do I brand myself as a job seeker, and how do I effectively network? And the reason why I chose these two is these are the most common questions I get, besides the usual "how do I get a job?" But that's a bit of a loaded question. So we're going to break it down and sort of pick up from our last speaker in January and sort of build on that. And so we'll answer these two questions today. Again, how do I brand myself as a job seeker, and how do I effectively network? Let's talk about branding basics. So branding is something where we have, again, there's a lot of noise out there. There are a lot of great books, there are a lot of great resources, a lot of cool videos on YouTube, a lot of great speakers. But again, the problem is there's a lot of information, and sometimes it's information that's contradictory. And a lot of times it's information that may work for a specific industry, but doesn't work for others. So I'm going to give a little bit more of a general overview in terms of how I see branding and how I work with it with my students and also with my clients that I coach on the side as well. First thing I want you to remember is you're a person, not a product. When we get into branding mode, we sometimes can go overboard. We'll develop all these cool aliases. We'll have a cool URL for our LinkedIn profile and our Twitter, and we will literally almost become like this commodity of a person. And to a certain extent, that's kind of cool because you're differentiating yourself. But what you're also doing is you're dehumanizing yourself. You're making yourself sort of a gimmick. And honestly, a lot of the advice that you hear from people talking about branding, they may come from the world of branding, but they come from the world of branding products. They don't come from the world of people. And so one of the things I want you to remember is that you're a person, you're not a product. So when it comes to branding, don't overthink it and don't overdo it.
So Andrew, I really like what you're talking about in terms of branding here. And to be honest, can kind of go both ways. On the one hand, see the importance of being authentic and, being a person. So versus a brand, we're a person. On the other hand, I could see some of our alumni saying, well, Andrew, I'm getting exactly like you're saying, I'm getting all this advice, and some folk out there are saying, but a brand is a promise of value, and my promise of value in the job market is to show someone, what that is, that I have the capability, the value that they need in their organization. Do you have any advice in terms of whether this differs in terms of industry and maybe even differs in terms of generation? So when I say industry, is it different in the tech industry versus maybe law or something that tends to be slightly more conservative? And again, to the generation, do you think this might be different for those of our alumni who are in that millennial generation, younger, versus our older alumni population that tend to be, again, like I said, maybe more retired and see, a little bit more conservative in their perspective of work and life not being as integrated? I'm imagining, Google environments where we have ping pong tables and, versus an environment that is, again, like I said, more conservative. Do you have any suggestions or anything there you'd like to give our alumni?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Luis. I will say this, honestly, I tend to see more, I tend to see, I guess, heavier branding in older generations because that's sort of that's the era they grew up in. That branding and that sort of really, it's not a bad thing, but adding a lot of fluff to your resume and things of that nature is something that I see a lot in more traditional industries and from older candidates. And so that's where we tend to see that, where we see the really heavy branding, where they lay it on thick, for lack of a better term. I don't mean to be disrespectful because I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it tends to be a little bit more prominent among older generations. The thing is the way we bring value to a company through our, the way we display value is through our work. You can brand all you want, but if you're not good at your job, it doesn't matter. You can have amazing branding. You can have a great sort of facade, a great image. But if you can't deliver and you haven't delivered in the past, there's really not much branding you can do to make up for that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I think that brings me to the next slide, is that authenticity is really refreshing. When you come from the world of recruiting, like I have, you notice that people tend to put on a bit of a persona when they interview. They're totally different than the way they talk with their friends and family members, which I will preface, it is really important to be professional during interviews, but by all means be yourself. Make sure that you're always being yourself. I always tell my students that be yourself. Unless you're a terrible person, then be someone else who's a good person. But authenticity is really refreshing, because when we talk to people on the phone, we tend to hear people like in this phone voice, and it's this like really exaggerated version of themselves, where they're extra peppy, they enunciate every single word clearly, they are super excited about things that you probably shouldn't be excited about. It's just, and it gets really old, because when you're interviewing, if you're not familiar with the world of recruiting, when we're talking to you, we're probably talking to at least 5 or 6 other people. Mm-hmm. And that usually happens over the course of a few days, maybe even one day. And so when you're dealing with multiple people a day and you're constantly being battered with inauthenticity, it gets old really fast. And so when you finally get on the phone with a candidate who is authentic, who is themselves, there is this really amazing distinction between you and the other candidates, because the other candidates may rely on sort of this branding model, whereas what I want you guys to start doing is relying on authenticity, being a professional version of yourself, but still being yourself. And that is extremely refreshing. I can't tell you how many times it's just been so nice to meet with a student, even here at GA, or just interviewing candidates who are actually just themselves. It's really refreshing. And the reason why you want to be yourself is because the company's not only evaluating you based on your skill level. We kind of put a huge weight on that, like whether you have the potential to do this job or the skills to do this job. But the other thing that company's looking for is that they're making sure that you're a fit for that organization. You know, half the time what a team is thinking is, can we see ourselves sitting next to this person for 8 to 10, maybe even 12 hours a day? Because that's going to be someone you're going to be spending a lot of time with coworkers. You want to make sure you get a feel for who they are.
Exactly.
And go ahead, Louise.
Oh, exactly. You know, you're really speaking the language of, in some realms, they call it the airport test. I believe in the consulting realm, because there's so much travel, would I be able to sit at an airport for 12 hours and on an airplane for 12 hours with this individual? Given that, and that really comes down to that authenticity, knowing, the emotional intelligence. Does this person have the emotional intelligence to work well in our organization with our team? Can I be with them for long periods of time?
Yeah, it's really, really, really important. And I will tell you, even from my own personal experience, actually, at my role at Facebook, I was almost passed on that role, because during my first interview, I was super polished, and I was almost over polished. It was something the feedback the team had given me after I started. They said, "Hey, during your first interview here, we're a pretty silly team, and during your first interview here, you were really, really, really serious and kind of stiff, and we weren't sure if you would be able to hang with us." So I could have lost out on an opportunity, one of the best opportunities I've had in my career, quite honestly, because I wasn't being myself. I promise I'm not just giving you this workshop just to shake things up. A lot of this stuff that I'm giving you is from my own personal experience, either as a candidate or coming from the recruiting world. So please be yourselves. There's really nothing more refreshing than meeting a candidate who is themselves. Obviously, be on time, dress well, all that stuff. Make sure that you're polished and you're professional, but don't forget who you are. Don't lose sight of who you are during these interviews, or in your branding, for lack of a better term. This is just what we're talking about. Again, like I said, companies are looking for who you are. They want to see how you fit the team. Are there any questions out there? Anyone? What kind of questions do we have?
We do not have any questions yet, but I will jump in and give those to you, Andrew, as we proceed. Haven't heard anything, but just reiterating what Andrew said, it's a careful balance between being authentic, being who you are, but being who you are means, also in the sense of that professional, not, that doesn't mean let it all hang out.
Right.
In terms of telling everybody everything about your personal life.
No, don't
but
do that.
Again, being authentic. And I really like that in terms of being, again, like you, Andrew, having been on both sides, been on a number of hiring committees, as well as then being in the hot seat myself. Definitely want to get that feel for the candidate in terms of getting to know them, who they are as a person and how they fit. So I really like that point about being authentic.
Thank you. And Luis does bring up a good point, guys. Again, we want you to be yourselves, but do be professional. Obviously, if you're someone who, some of us just tend to be tardy everywhere. Some of us are just kind of wired that way. I know I'm that way. I'm not very good at being places on time, but for interviews, that's the first thing that I get out of the way. It's like, no, I've got to be on time. Some of you might, be a little bit more lax, maybe in terms of the language that you use and things of that nature. Again, be yourself, but be professional. Keep in mind that you're still on a job interview. We want them to see who you are. And we want to be personable, but also make a distinction that you're on a job interview or you're talking to possible colleagues in the future. This isn't about, these aren't friends that you're, grabbing beers with or something.
Exactly.
Cool. With that said, so we moved on. Let's review really quickly. So in terms of branding, always remember that you are a person. You are not a product. So keep things simple. Be yourself. Really practical ways of branding are just making sure your URLs are consistent. If you're on LinkedIn, make sure you edit your URL so that it's easy to find you. If you go on LinkedIn right now, you might see that your LinkedIn profile says linkedin.com/in, and then it maybe has a dash in, and then it has another dash, and then your name, and then a string of incoherent characters. You can actually go in and change that. So I would say pick a professional username for your URL. I usually tell everyone use your first initial last name or first name last initial or a combination of those two, and create a URL. So that you're easy to find on LinkedIn. Try and make that consistent with your Twitter handle as well, particularly if you're looking for work in the tech space. Having a Twitter account is important as long as it's tech related. If it's a personal Twitter account, then there's no need to share that. But if you're really into the tech scene and you're talking about events and all the stuff that's going on in whatever your particular interest in technology is, make sure those things are consistent. If you have a portfolio site, keep the portfolio site consistent, URL consistent with all of your usernames as well. Again, just so that you're easy to find. If not, maybe you have a name that's very common. It's not the end of the world. Don't worry about it. But these are practical steps you can take to make sure that your branding is consistent. Other practical ways is when you're sending out resumes and cover letters, make sure your cover letters and resumes are written in the same font, same size, using the same color scheme. I would say use the same header on your resume that you are using on, use the same header on your cover letter, that you have on your resume, because it's a nice consistent look. And that's why I want you guys to look at branding in a really practical way, as opposed to just coming up with nicknames for yourselves or a particular persona. Because to a certain extent, if there's no results behind that, it's actually very difficult to take you seriously as a candidate. But these are the little things I want you all to consider. So,
absolutely. So, just to reiterate, having reviewed probably over 1,000 resumes, I would say you really want to make sure that your branding is professional. And by branding, again, not meaning inauthentic, but that, your email address is a professional sounding email. Candy Floss 101 is going to be a harder sell. And so ensuring that you're getting that professional sounding name, and then keeping them consistent across the board, across all your platforms. So Twitter, LinkedIn, ensuring that if somebody was to look at you, your SEO is going to be slightly higher, given that it's going to be the same name used in multiple areas. So that's great advice. Given this, that we're kind of on this topic, or we seem to have gotten into this, Andrew, some of our alumni might be interested in this notion of, we have heard from multiple, voices that we need to have all of these platforms. We need to have Twitter, we need to have LinkedIn, also maybe need to have a portfolio, but also knowing that we have limited time. Would you say there's any given specific one? And I know it may vary by industry, but any specific platform that you focus on more than the others? So potentially more on LinkedIn, or what are your suggestions there, given that our job seekers have limited time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say it's necessarily one, but it's a combination of various outlets. So if you're in the world of anything visual, so let's say, for now, we'll say design, whether it's UX design, visual design, graphic design, these kinds of things, you need a platform that displays your work so people can actually physically see it. Particularly in the Southern California area, we are a very, very visual-based market. In fact, there are a lot of people that are in jobs that aren't necessarily the most visual-focused fields, but employers still want to see some of your work. So I'd say if you're in any kind of design field, it's very important to have a portfolio site. Obviously, very important to have LinkedIn, because this is how you connect with possible employers and recruiters. And the other two that might not be as well known are Behance, which is a platform for designers. And then you can either pick Twitter or Instagram. Honestly, either one would be fine, but I would say whichever one you pick, make sure that that one is just dedicated to your design work and not your personal life.
Exactly. So you make the great point there. And I think that answers one of the questions that already came in, Andrew, giving suggestions on portfolio and platforms. And I think you actually already addressed that. If the person who asked that question wants further detail, feel free to just tell us if we actually got to what you were asking there. We want to make sure
please do.
we got to your question.
Yeah. If you're in the world of web development or software engineering, pretty similar. LinkedIn is going to be really important. Having a portfolio site is going to be really important, and having some of your projects on that site is going to be really important. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have two links to every project. One will be a link to the GitHub repo for that project so people can see your code. And then the other link you're going to want to have is the actual live version of your app, so that someone who is non-technical can actually try out whatever it is you built. So LinkedIn, portfolio site, GitHub is going to be very, very important for you. As a developer, keeping it active is going to be very, very, very important. So make sure that you are pushing to GitHub often. Contributing to open source projects is very, very important. And this is the same if you're looking for work as a data scientist as well. I know a lot of particularly UCR alumni, once they get into, if they're in the sciences and going into like the PhD level, they tend to go into work as data scientists. So making sure that your GitHub is clean, your file structure is good, that your repos are clearly labeled, your READMEs are coherent. That's going to be really, really important. If you're coming into maybe a more traditional industry, maybe mechanical, chemical engineering, or the world of finance, honestly, the only thing you'll probably need is just a really well-built LinkedIn profile.
Absolutely. And that's, at least in my experience, for those in more traditional fields, law, engineering, I would say LinkedIn is key. That's really where you want to spend your most of your time in terms of online platforms. Again, kind of, and this is something we mentioned in our last session, making sure that, yes, you can have all of these platforms, but where you're really going to see a lot of traction is in-person contact, in terms of building those relationships, building trust with the folk that are in your network. So whatever you do online, the goal is to get to that in-person contact. Absolutely.
Which brings us to our next section, actually. That's a great segue.
Great.
Let's talk about networking. Networking is another just really common theme that we hear. We hear branding and networking. Branding and networking is really, really important in the job search. So let's talk a little bit about networking. Again, we're going to keep things really simple. Some of this information may be new to you, but we're going to keep it really, really simple because I want you to actually walk away with actual practical tips from this workshop. One of the things about networking, one of the reasons why we don't like networking is because we have certain connotations that come with it. There's this image in our mind, there are these words in our mind that come up about networking. And the first thing is networking is usually very transactional. We're only talking to people because we want something from them. We're only going to this event because we're trying to find a job or trying to find a client. And for a lot of us, that makes us feel really weird, particularly for those of us who are millennials. It just doesn't really jive with us. For older generations, it's kind of something that they've just always done, and it's sort of this song and dance that they're okay with. But I've noticed for younger generations, we don't tend to go to these events because of the transactional nature of it. It feels gross. It's artificial. Again, there's not a lot of authenticity that's happening in networking. Again, we're not even just the polished version of ourselves. We're usually an entirely different person when we go out to these events. And again, a lot of times we feel like the conversations are not motivated out of pure intention. It's usually just, all right, I'm talking to this person so I can get something from them, or they're talking to me so they can get something from me. Networking is usually very self-serving as well, which is why we just don't like it, because it feels, again, we're just going out there to get something. And the people at the event usually are also there to get something out of the people there. To sum it up, networking is gross. It really is. It's one of those things that just is really hard to get over. And this is something I have to push with my students. They don't like going to events and meeting people because of these very things. And I agree with them. I'm not going to tell them to go out and do something that makes them feel uncomfortable. But what I want to introduce you to is this concept of ending networking altogether and start thinking about connecting. That doesn't mean that we don't go to events. It just means we change the way we think. Networking says, what can you do for me? What value does this person bring to me by talking to them? Why should I talk to this person? And that's what we're thinking in our mind, is like, what benefit does this person give me? And that's why networking feels really weird. And please feel free to chime in if that's something that resonates with you. Because I know for me, it definitely feels that way. I don't like networking that way. It's weird. I don't want to talk to somebody just to get something out of them. I think it's kind of gross. But connecting with people puts us in the mindset of, how can I help? Connecting puts us in this mindset of, let me genuinely get to know who this person is. Doesn't necessarily mean we're like becoming best friends or we're getting into personal territory, but it just means let's go a little bit deeper than just talking to this person so I can get something out of them. Let me find out who they are. Let me find out what's going on in their organization. And then the way we can get ourselves onto their radar in terms of maybe being an employee at their company, or maybe becoming a possible client of, or having them become a possible client of ours, is by thinking in our minds when we're talking to them is, how can I help?
I really like this, Andrew, and this gets at actually the gentleman who wrote Never Eat Alone. I recently wrote an article about and fascinatingly so, he wrote this book about the value of building what I would say networks.
Yeah.
The premise of the book, Never Eat Alone. But actually has said that networking events are valueless. I believe in his words itself, for this very reason, that at networking events, you're going to have all of the same individuals, all looking for jobs and all asking that question of, that transactional question of, what can you do for me versus how can I help? And I would say this mentality, this mind shift is applicable even for those alumni on the call who are employed in job situations. Going into your meetings, going into your work relationships with the mindset of how can I help, can really change the dynamic of those working relationships.
Absolutely. It actually builds connection, as opposed to just talking to somebody to get something out of them. It's really important. Again, you've got to put the human aspect back into the job search. We can't just dehumanize people and essentially see them, especially people in the hiring world or someone who's employed as a company. They're not just a vending machine who are giving out jobs, and we just need to find out, what the correct amount is that we need to give them. We've really got to connect with people on a personal level. And again, it doesn't mean that we're best friends with these people. It's just that we go and actually have conversation with people. That's what I tell my students. They're like, I don't know what to do with these events. I'm like, go have a conversation with somebody. That's all you need to do. It's really nothing more than that.
That sounds good. And this kind of gets at a little bit of one of the questions, I believe actually coming from someone who works with students here at UC Riverside. And he's talking a little bit about, his question is actually, some students might find it very difficult to be themselves. So kind of going back to our question about authenticity, would you recommend students take any kind of EQ, emotional intelligence training, or something that helps them really know that balance of being themselves, but at the same time being professional? What are your thoughts on that, Andrew?
I don't think that's a bad idea, but I wouldn't push that. I just wouldn't put that much thought into it. I think the more thought we put into the things, the more complicated they actually become.
Sure.
So I would say, honestly, just use your best judgment. Use your best judgment. If you're not sure about a topic you should talk about, you're not sure about how to present yourself break things down. All right. How am I dressing? What am I talking about? What time do I get there? If any of those, any aspect of those issues you're not sure of, then just don't do it. If you're not sure about something, but go with the things that you're real confident in. So
that's good.
I would say do that as opposed to sort of piling yourself up with extra knowledge that you may not need. So
being debilitated by the amount of information you're receiving.
Exactly, because that's what happens on the job searches. We all end up kind of numb because we're actually like over-informed.
Bombarded, yeah.
Exactly. So keep it simple. Use your best judgment. If you're not sure about something, then steer clear of it. So I would say do that. And I think we need to give ourselves a little bit more credit. I think most of us are equipped to, be able to navigate these situations professionally. I think it's because of that abundance of information, we tend to become dependent on it, and we don't really look inwardly and go, oh, okay, no, that's I can do that. It's a bit of a process, but you'll get there.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And I would say, honestly, this mindset of connecting with people genuinely is not only the only way we need to network. I know I said only a lot, because the traditional way of networking nowadays just doesn't work. There are way too many candidates out there. There are a lot of very, very competitive industries, particularly if you're here in Southern California. We have new people coming to the area every single day, especially since our tech scene started growing. We have this crazy exponential growth. If you live in LA like I do, you've noticed that in the last few years, our rent has gone up pretty significantly because we have people coming in all the time. And so quite honestly, it is not only better for you just personally to just go out and genuinely connect with people, but it is better for you as a job seeker to go out and genuinely connect, because there are too many candidates out there that are using the traditional networking method. And so if you happen to go down that same path as well, you're not standing out. You're not standing out among the group of people. And standing out is what gets you a job, being unique. And so just genuinely connect with people, just have conversations with them. My students do this all the time, and it leads to really, really cool opportunities. I recently, actually just yesterday, got off the phone with one of my students. After he finished the web development program here at General Assembly in LA, he returned home to Portland, where he's from, and we spoke on the phone, and he goes, dude, I got a teaching assistant job, part-time. And I said, that's awesome. How'd you get that? And he goes, oh, I just went to an event, and I started talking to somebody, and turns out we went to the same university, and turns out her husband owns a coding boot camp. And they asked me if I would help. And now he has a cool gig, like, 10, 15 hours a week to help pay some bills, all because he connected with people genuinely, and had a conversation with them. Again, from my own personal experience, this works. Alongside career coaching, I also play music. I've been playing music for a really, really long time. I play guitar and I sing. And I don't really have a following. I don't have an actual active career. I haven't gigged in years. But in the last year and a half, I've managed to not close, I guess, but I've managed to get 3 endorsement deals from various guitar and amplifier manufacturers, only because of just genuinely connecting with people. I didn't go through a website. I didn't have any representation. I just went and met people who worked for these companies and built a connection with them. And then honestly, I even asked them, I was like, hey, how can I help? And, a lot of them were just like, we need help promoting XYZ thing. Can you do that for us? I'm like, yeah, sure. And then the relationship just started. And I have several friends who are actually way more active in the music scene that I've done, guys who've done, like amazing tours. And they come to me and they're like, dude, are you serious? How is this happening? Like, we've tried to connect with blah, 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 blah for years and we can't get them. Like, just go talk to them. Just talk to them, be genuine. And that's all you need to do. Just connect with people. Like I said earlier, authenticity is refreshing. When you're talking to somebody and you're not actually trying to get something from them, it's really refreshing. Think about that in your personal life. When you're actually talking to someone who's genuinely interested in you, it feels really nice. And that's the way we want to approach the job search as well. And then with that said, so we kind of covered the sort of philosophical thing. I know we got really heady there, so sorry. But let's talk about the strategic side of things now. So now we've talked about our mindset, but let's put some action to what we've just talked about. So identify the events you're going to attend in person strategically. I can't specify how important it is to connect in person. So the way we identify events strategically is we split them up into 2 different classifications. So the first classification is, where are events that I fit in? These are events that are in your particular industry or the industry that you want to work or the industry you want to be a part of, pardon me. So if you're an accountant right now, you would probably go to accounting conferences and meetings that are designed for your field. This is where most people in the audience will be just like you. They will either all be accountants or people who are seeking to become accountants, things of that nature. So the first kind of event is, where do you fit in? The advantage of these kinds of events is that you get to meet with people who are like-minded. If you're new to a field, you will likely meet people who are a little bit more experienced, which is awesome because hopefully you can befriend those folks and eventually lean on them as mentors, maybe use them in the future as a referral to a job, or just get some great tips from them. So that's the first kind of event. The second kind of event you're going to want to identify is, where do you stand out? So these are events that are sort of outside of your area of expertise. So again, if we're using accounting, you would go to an event that maybe is in a similar field, but sort of out of your comfort zone. Maybe you go to an event about how technology and data is affecting financial markets. You see how that's still somewhat closely related, but it's still also pretty far out there. And the importance of going to events where you stand out is, one, it's just that. It's an event where you stand out. You may be one of people there who do what you do, which is awesome, because if you meet someone who could be hiring, you have a very unique platform because there's no one else there who does what you do. The other thing is, it'll give you a well-rounded view of the industry that you're trying to get into. And also, again, events where you stand out are going to have a much more diverse diverse audience. So you may meet people who are in the recruiting world. You may meet people who are hiring managers for these roles, and your chances of finding someone who could get you a referral greatly increase, because at events where you don't stand out, everyone, or at least half the people, might be in the same shoes as you are, where they may be job seekers. Whereas in an event where you're standing out, you might be the only job seeker there, which is pretty awesome.
Do you have any, Andrew, to jump in at this point, do you have any recommendations in terms of where our alumni could find these kind of events?
Yeah.
So, you know, and obviously there's a number of things. So, you know, Meetup, LinkedIn, what are some of the main, you know, ways in which you could suggest individuals finding the event that's both going to be broad as well as deep? So, you know, depth of experience, you're saying those events that are niche and then the events that are broader. So you get both.
That's awesome. Great question. Where you're going to want to go are a few places you can go. Eventbrite is a great website for finding meetups. Meetup.com is a good one. I would just tread lightly or be very careful with Meetup, because sometimes they will post events that are old. So just pay attention to the date. Okay. If you are in an industry that has that's part of a particular association or accreditation board or things of that nature, visiting those websites will have some great meetups. If you're interested in the technology space, Built in LA is a great space for those of you who are in the Los Angeles area. But if you're wherever else you may be, there's a Built in Chicago, there's a Built in San Francisco, there's a Built in London. Any of the Built in sites are really, really great for finding these kinds of events. Even companies like, I hate to plug us, but General Assembly has a lot of events that happen that are technology centered, but also branch out into industries. We just had an event, a few weeks ago that was about how technology is affecting the food industry. And so I would check out General Assembly's website. I would check out websites from other not coding boot camps, but other immersive programs like Product School. They have great meetups or for any of you who are trying to get into product management or project management. Those are the resources I would direct you guys in.
Great. And then also don't forget your alumni association.
Yeah.
And we do also host a number of events, and some of them are going to have an industry focus, and some of them are going to be geographically, you know, in terms of geographic location. But take a look also at our website for, you know, those as well. And we probably need to move along, Andrew. I think we're getting close here to time.
We are. And so really quickly, with everyone that you meet, get their contact information. It's okay if you don't have business cards, get their business cards, follow up with them within 24 hours, just to stay fresh in their mind, and continue that follow-up every few weeks. I would say every 3 to 6 weeks, just maybe you see something about the company that they work with in the news or their industry, drop them a line and talk to them. Really quickly, I'll touch on digital networking. I'll just blaze through it. One of the ways LinkedIn really helps is you're able to find recruiters on there. So I would say in the search bar, type in the name of the company that you're looking for and then the word recruiter after it, or just type in the name of the company that you're interested in being a part of, and then go to that company's LinkedIn page, and then you're able to see all the employees who work there. Find the recruiters on there, invite them to connect. Avoid using InMail. If you use LinkedIn, there's always that option of InMail. InMail is basically spam that you can pay for, so I would avoid it. Most people don't tend to check it. I don't tend to check my InMail. But once they approve the connection with you, send them a message. Or better yet, once they connect with you, there's a contact info tab that is very, very small when they're not a connection with you. But once they connect, it will expand, and you can actually most of the time find their email address. And I would just send them a short message that is introducing yourself, that is telling them why you're interested in working for that company in that particular role, and ask if they have time to talk next week. So really, really short, 150 words or less. I tell all of my students, be polite, but get straight to the point. So none of this, hey, how's everything going? Weather's been crazy lately. Just drop them a line and say, hey, Claire, I see that you're a recruiter for Service Titan, and I recently noticed that you guys are hiring for a, customer implementation specialist role. I think what you guys do is awesome because of blah, 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 blah. And I've actually recently applied to the role, and I was wondering if you had some more information and if you had some time next week to talk about the role. And something straightforward like that will get you a lot of times we don't hear back from recruiters, but when they do respond to you, so I will say this has a low response rate, but when they do get back to you, it can be really, really, really helpful. So don't let that stop you. Any questions?
And And one last question, actually. We're close to time here, so I want to make sure that we get to the last question we had. Somebody was referring back to the networking events that we talked about and said sometimes there's a crowd around certain individuals or certain person. Everybody wants to talk to the same person, and it's hard to navigate and get to that person in a way that's genuine but also respectful. What is your advice in those kind of situations?
I would say, for one, be proactive. If you're trying to talk to maybe the speaker or one of the panelists, know that in advance, and so try and sit towards the front so you can get up and talk to them. You can also be patient. Most people are pretty cool with just sticking around and talking to people. But otherwise, don't overthink it. I mean, just because someone isn't on a panel or isn't the main speaker of the event doesn't mean that they won't have good information for you. Talk to the person you're sitting next to, and just start from there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And it looks like we're actually at time, Andrew. We're at 12:46.
Awesome.
So we want to be cognizant of that. But we'd like to just thank every single alumnus and alumna that's on the call with us today. We just value everything that you do in making this network strong. We want our alumni to be able to help each other. That's why all of our speakers are alumni. And so thank you for joining us for today's session. I would encourage you to register for our next session. We have a speaker from Instagram who's going to be talking about, now I'm in the job, now what? So what are the steps that you can take once you're in a role to make sure that your value is noticed? How do you prepare for meetings? What are some of the very practical things you can be doing once you're in a job in specifically those first 6 months, which are really key? So that is going to be our next event, and that's on March 13th. Please go ahead and make sure you register for that. And without further ado, we're going to sign off. Andrew, thank you again. We just appreciate everything, and hopefully our alumni do too. And we're going to sign off. Thank you again, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.